Nobody in Tel Aviv wanted to say this out loud. For years, Israel built its military dominance in the Middle East on one assumption above all others: that its air force could move through the region's skies without being seen, that its F-35 jets, the most advanced stealth aircraft in the world, gave it a freedom of action that no adversary in the region could challenge. That if Israel decided something needed to happen from the air, it would happen before anyone on the ground knew the planes were coming. That assumption just took a serious hit. And the country that delivered that hit did not do it with fighter jets or missiles or conventional military confrontation. It did it with radar, patient, methodical, deliberately developed radar technology that has been quietly changing what is visible in Middle Eastern skies in ways that Israeli and American military planners are now having to publicly acknowledge. Iran deployed it, but the story of where it came from and who benefited most from the moment Israel's stealth advantage was compromised leads somewhere that makes this situation far more complex than a simple Iran-Israel military confrontation. It leads to Beijing. Let's go through this carefully, because what is happening here is not just a military technology story. It is a story about shifting power in a region that the United States has dominated strategically for decades. And the shift is happening in ways that were not supposed to be possible this soon. First, understand what stealth actually means in practice, because the word gets used so frequently that people forget what the military advantage it describes actually delivers. Stealth is not invisibility. An F-35 does not disappear from the physical world when it takes off. What stealth does is reduce the aircraft's radar cross-section to a point where conventional radar systems cannot detect it at ranges that would give a defender enough time to respond. The plane is there, the radar just cannot see it until it is already too close for the information to be useful. For Israel, operating in a region surrounded by adversaries with Russian-supplied air defense systems and Iranian-developed capabilities, stealth meant freedom. It meant the ability to strike targets in Syria, to conduct operations that were never officially acknowledged, to maintain a qualitative military edge that compensated for the numerical disadvantages of a small country surrounded by larger hostile populations. The entire Israeli strategic doctrine of what military analysts call the campaign between wars, the sustained low-intensity operations to prevent adversaries from developing capabilities that would threaten Israeli security, depended on that freedom of movement through contested airspace. What Iran's radar deployment challenges is precisely that freedom. Now let's talk about what Iran actually deployed and why it matters. Over the past several years, Iranian military engineers, working with technologies and knowledge that did not originate entirely within Iran, developed and positioned radar systems using frequency ranges and detection methods specifically designed to address the stealth problem. Low-frequency radar, passive detection systems that do not emit signals that can be targeted and destroyed, networked arrays that share data across multiple sites to build a picture that no single installation could produce alone. These are not secret concepts. Military technology analysts and defense publications have been tracking Iran's radar development program for years. What changed recently is the deployment pattern, the positioning of these systems in ways that create overlapping coverage across corridors that Israeli aircraft have used for operations in Syria and potentially beyond. Israeli military sources, speaking to defense journalists in terms that were clearly intended to reach the public, acknowledged that the radar environment in the region had become more complex. That language, coming from a military establishment that rarely volunteers information about its operational vulnerabilities, is significant. It means something changed, something that required acknowledgement even from people who would prefer the situation remained unacknowledged. Now here is where the story becomes something more than a regional military competition. Iran did not develop these capabilities in isolation. The specific technologies involved in low-frequency radar detection of stealth aircraft, the signal processing, the networked architecture, the passive detection methods, these are areas where Chinese defense research has been leading globally since the 1990s, when a United States F-117 stealth aircraft was shot down over Serbia, and Chinese intelligence services were reported by multiple Western sources to have obtained components of that wreckage. What China learned from that aircraft and from 2 decades of subsequent research into stealth detection became some of the most strategically valuable military technology on the planet, and China made decisions about how to share elements of that knowledge with partners whose success in applying it would serve Chinese strategic interests. Iran is a partner whose success in challenging American and Israeli air superiority serves Chinese strategic interests in multiple ways. Every time Iranian capabilities force Israel and the United States to recalculate their freedom of military action in the Middle East, China's strategic position improves relatively. Not because China fired a single shot, but because the resources, the attention, the military planning capacity that Washington and Tel Aviv must now devote to managing a more complex air defense environment in the Middle East is resources and attention that cannot simultaneously be devoted to the Pacific. China has been watching the Middle East consume American strategic energy for 2 decades. It did not accidentally provide technology assistance to a country whose military development keeps that consumption going. The Israeli response to this development has operated on 2 tracks simultaneously. The public track has been measured. Official statements acknowledged a changing environment while emphasizing Israeli military adaptability and continued capability. The message to domestic audiences and to allies was, "We see this, we are managing it, our qualitative edge remains." The private track, visible through procurement decisions and reported conversations between Israeli and American defense officials, tells a more urgent story. Israel accelerated its requests for additional F-35 aircraft. It intensified discussions with the United States about electronic warfare capabilities, specifically designed to operate in environments where radar detection has become more sophisticated. It invested in drone technologies that can operate in contested airspace at lower political and military cost than manned aircraft whose loss would carry strategic implications. These are not the responses of a military establishment that is unconcerned. These are the responses of one that found its operating assumptions challenged and is working urgently to adapt. The adaptation costs money, it costs time, and it costs the strategic clarity that comes from knowing your capabilities are decisively superior to your adversaries. That clarity, once lost, is difficult to recover. Washington's reaction to this situation has been complicated by a fact that American officials find difficult to discuss publicly. The United States sold Israel the F-35. It provided the technology, the training, the logistical support. It certified the aircraft as the cornerstone of Israeli air power for the coming generation. The message to Israel and to every other country that purchased or sought to purchase the F-35 was unambiguous. This aircraft operates where other aircraft cannot. Its stealth is its fundamental value proposition. When Iran deploys radar systems that credibly challenge that value proposition, even partially, even in specific corridors rather than comprehensively, the implications extend far beyond the Israel-Iran bilateral confrontation. Every country that purchased or is considering purchasing the F-35 based on its stealth characteristics is watching what is happening in the Middle East and asking questions. American defense contractors and American officials responsible for the largest arms export program in history have significant interest in how this situation is characterized and what conclusions are drawn from it. That interest does not make the Iranian radar deployment less real, but it does shape how the story gets told in official Washington, and it creates a gap between what defense analysts are saying in technical publications and what American officials are prepared to acknowledge in public statements. China's position in all of this is the part of the story that receives the least attention in Western coverage and deserves the most. Beijing has pursued a consistent strategic approach to the Middle East that differs fundamentally from both American and Russian involvement in the region. Where the United States commits military forces and becomes directly entangled in regional conflicts, and where Russia deploys military assets to preserve specific client relationships, China provides technology, invests in infrastructure, maintains commercial relationships across competing regional powers, and avoids direct military commitment. The result of this approach is that China accumulates strategic benefit from regional instability without absorbing its costs. Every American aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf is an American asset not in the Pacific. Every $1 billion Washington commits to Israeli air defense supplementation is $1 billion not invested in Indo-Pacific military infrastructure. Every planning hour American military commanders devote to Middle Eastern scenarios is an hour not devoted to Taiwan contingencies. China did not create the Iran-Israel confrontation, but it has made investments, including technology sharing, that enhanced Iranian military capabilities, that ensure the confrontation continues consuming the strategic energy of its primary competitor. That is not conspiracy. That is strategy. and it is working with a consistency and effectiveness that American policymakers are only beginning to fully articulate publicly. There is a broader point here that goes beyond the specific radar systems and the specific aircraft and the specific bilateral confrontations involved. The era in which American military technology was so decisively superior to anything adversaries could develop or acquire that it could be used with near impunity in contested environments is over. Not because American technology stopped advancing, but because the global diffusion of sophisticated military technology through Chinese technology transfer, through Russian arms sales, through the indigenous development programs of countries like Iran that have invested heavily in asymmetric capabilities, has compressed the qualitative gap that American and Israeli military doctrine was built around. This compression does not mean Iran can defeat Israel in a conventional military confrontation. It cannot. It does not mean Chinese radar technology has made the F-35 obsolete. It has not. What it means is that the specific military freedom of action that Israel exercised routinely over the past decade, the ability to operate in contested airspace with high confidence that adversaries could not effectively track or respond, has become more costly and more complicated to exercise. And complicated military situations have a way of producing outcomes that nobody planned for and nobody wanted. The coming months will reveal how seriously the relevant parties have absorbed what this development means. Israel faces decisions about how aggressively to continue its campaign between wars operations in Syria and potentially Lebanon, given a more complex radar environment. Those decisions carry consequences either way. Continuing operations at previous tempo in a more contested environment accepts higher operational risk. Reducing operational tempo allows adversaries to develop capabilities with less interruption. The United States faces decisions about how to characterize and respond to the Chinese technology transfer dimension of this situation. Publicly acknowledging that Chinese radar technology contributed to compromising Israeli air superiority creates diplomatic and commercial complications. Failing to acknowledge it allows the situation to continue developing without adequate strategic response. Iran faces decisions about how aggressively to publicize its capabilities. Loudly advertising what its radar systems can detect invites targeted efforts to neutralize those systems. Keeping the capabilities ambiguous preserves their deterrent effect while leaving adversaries uncertain about the true extent of the challenge. And China faces no difficult decisions at all. It is watching its strategic investments produce exactly the outcomes its planners intended. American attention consumed in the Middle East, Israeli military planning complicated, F-35 capability narratives questioned in international arms markets. All of it achieved without a single Chinese soldier or aircraft deployed anywhere near the conflict.